Hello, friends, and welcome to the Power of Attunement YouTube channel. This is an episode of our Attunement Legacy audio series. And my name is Gary Goodhue, and I will be your host. In this episode, we're going to be exploring a piece by Martin Cecil titled Reaction or Response. It's a beautiful little piece with some great insights inside of it. And as before, I will follow up the audio recording with a synopsis and repeating some of Martin's wisdom that comes through in this service, as well as expanding on some of the topics. But before we get into that, I want to invite you to go ahead and hit the like button so that you can help others discover the valuable content. We love having you on this journey and definitely invite you to comment as well below so that we can share from our collective wisdom. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications so that you know whenever we release new content. We'll be doing that regularly and sharing about the transformative power of attunement. We're going to go ahead and play the Martin audio titled Reaction or Response here in just a minute. But before I do, I want to familiarize you with a couple terms that Martin uses inside of this piece. He uses the term the angel. And when he says that, what he's referring to is not necessarily a little being sitting up on a cloud with wings, but the divine nature of each and every one of us. And there's so many different words to describe our own divine nature. In this piece, he's using the word angel. In other pieces, Yolanda has used the word the wonderful one within. I've also heard it described as our God self, soul God, master self, father within, the inner self, the higher self. These are all just different namings for the one eternal reality, which is the presence of God that we are at a higher dimension. It's the truth of the being that is eternal, that exists before we incarnate in a body, as we're in the body, and after. It is that part of us that is connected to God and never dies. And so to help us relate to that part of self, he's been using the term the angel. He also uses another term called human nature, and that is related to the personality dimension of ourselves. The part of ourselves that's majorly ruled by the conscious mind, or what's sometimes called the ego, the personality that's been developed through the lifetime and is in itself quite limited, but actually thinks it's the expanse of all that is. Hence, the ego. It's what Yolanda has been known to refer to as the outer self. So I just wanted to share those two terms so you're familiar with the dynamic of what he's talking about, as well as another term that he uses is creative action. And he does explain this through the piece. That is the action that is stimulated from the angel or the divine self that moves through us into consciousness. Before I go on any further, let's enjoy this audio piece of Martin Cecil, originally spoken as a service in 1975. And I'll be back to share more after the recording.
The angel is the beginning of the creation of God. By reason of the angel, and consequent spiritual expression, on earth, the true creative cause is present. When this creative cause is present, there may either be response on the part of human beings or reaction. These words, response and reaction, may be used interchangeably in the usual human language. But we may use them to make a distinction. The word response would indicate a moving with. Whatever the creative action may be. The word reaction would imply a certain resistance, the engendering of conflict. We noted this morning how human beings react to reaction. One may react also to creative action. But in either case, there is movement toward disintegration on the part of the one who reacts. I believe Michael read a story at lunch the other day about some medical treatment. And this very vividly portrays what occurs in human experience, not only with respect to the medical field, but in the total state of human existence. This man got sick and was treated for his trouble correctly. I believe it was a sore throat, if I remember rightly. And he received penicillin. But he reacted to the penicillin. And so he received another diagnosis and treatment. And so it went through a whole succession of such events. The diagnosis was correct in each case, and the specific treatment was given according to the diagnosis. And in each case, it disposed of the particular symptoms in question. But in doing so, of course, it also produced other symptoms, which then had to be disposed of. Reaction leads to reaction. And eventually, in this particular story, the man had received a certain drug which relaxed him so much that he drove into a tree in his car and was killed. So the whole succession of events ended fatally. And the whole succession of human experience, reaction to reaction, always ends fatally. Response is not response to reaction, but response to creative action. That creative action may increasingly emerge in human experience, because the human being is moving with that creative action. He is not contending with it. He is not reacting against it. He is not reacting in the sense of trying to change it, to make it better, presumably, but is willing to let it be whatever it is, just moving with it. So the word response relates to this. Reaction may seem to be justifiable, but it always leads to further reaction and eventually to the ultimate reaction, which is death. Response, on the other hand, as we use this word, leads to the increasing experience of life. There is movement with creative action, so that the nature of that action is expanded, is not changed, no attempt is made to cause it to be something other than it is. Simply movement with creative action. Now, of course, human beings have been so busy reacting all over the place that they've had very little capacity remaining for response. The immediate attitude towards something that happens is almost invariably reaction. Because this happened, I must do that. Because someone said this, I must consequently behave in that manner. Here we see confusion confounded. What needs to be brought to bear more directly into any such situation is not further reaction. If one has the habit of reaction, it seems difficult not to react. But of course one had oneself form the habit of reaction. Creative action is always present, simply by reason of the fact that the angel is present in relationship to each person as long as life remains. So the creative action is there, but not discerned by most because they are preoccupied with all their reactions. This is why the suggestion is made to give thanks, for instance, so that pause may be given to all the reaction. Just be thankful. And to the extent that a person takes such a suggestion seriously, he may pause from his reactions. He pauses from his reactions to give thanks. His attention is directed away from what he would habitually have done. So that there may be what is rightly referred to as a relaxing. Human beings in their reactive state are constantly on the defensive, as we well know. We have had the experience ourselves, probably it's still hanging around, so that we feel it necessary to defend ourselves from all the things that come upon us. We are suspicious of our fellows. We are suspicious of their motives. And we can very easily justify such suspicions, no doubt. But it causes us to be uptight. And uptightness is the state of reaction, the state of defensiveness. Until we were weak and easily overwhelmed. Now, this is the attitude that most people seem to have towards themselves. Otherwise, they wouldn't feel it was necessary to be on the defensive all the time. They are proclaiming, a defensive person is always proclaiming, I am weak. I am weak and easily overwhelmed. And the more touchy a person is, the greater his proclamation of weakness. Don't you dare touch me, I might be hurt. The reactionary state, so common, so prevalent, characterizing human nature, give thanks, relax, be quiet a moment, and do not imagine that you have to defend yourself. Now, as I say, this self-defense attitude toward life seems so reasonable. What are we going to do if someone attacks us? Well, why should someone attack you? Well, people are getting mugged all the time. Does everybody get mugged? Or only certain ones? Why do they get mugged? Well, let's not go into this. But we need to see that there are reasons, that things do not happen by chance. According to our reactions, so is it established unto us. Just as surely as, according to our response, so is it established unto us. Response, a moving with angelic action. Angelic action is the creative power of God. It has been suggested that God might be almighty. When there is movement with this creative power, there would be no need, obviously, for a posture of defense. The creative power is going to be a challenge to others. Of course, one of the methods of defense in human nature is to challenge someone else. The challenge of this creative power is not a belligerent challenge. For the most part, it creeps up on people unawares. But it is a reality nevertheless. If there is an angel present and in expression, the expression of the angel we have called spiritual expression. Spiritual expression is made possible by reason of the human mind and heart, the human mind and body. Someone must be present on earth if there is to be spiritual expression. We might say that God is present, but there's no evidence of his presence except as there is spiritual expression. Now, of course, certain levels of a spiritual expression appear through people and through all living forms, so that we do have some evidence of the presence of God. But it is extremely limited, extremely restricted. And that restriction has been placed by human beings. Because man, as we know, created in the image and likeness of God, is supposed to permit the creative action of the angel on earth. If the creative action of the angel is on earth, then that fact is reflected in the world around man. There is a new world, a different world, a world which reveals the presence of the angel. The world becomes a setting for the angelic presence. And human beings themselves are the first setting in this regard. But that setting extends to include the whole world, the whole environment here on earth. We have a certain awareness of these things. The coming of the angel is based in response. A person must be sufficiently quiet inside, having relinquished defensiveness adequately, to sense the presence of the angel. Now here again, of course, the human mind is inclined to get busy and develop concepts as to what this would mean. We don't need any. We don't know what it would mean until we have the experience. And we won't have the experience if we have a preconception. We'll simply block it. The way is extremely easy, you know, only the human mind makes it seem to be so terribly difficult, because we have been conned into imagining that nothing of any moment can be done unless the human mind is in there saying that it should be done this way or that way, unless the human mind knows all about it. That obviously is ridiculous. Did you ever cut your finger? Was it healed subsequently? Did the human mind know anything about it at all? Has no faintest idea as to what happened, but it healed. The angel is present. The creative action is present, whether human beings know it or not. They're usually so busy about their own reactionary affairs that they're not interested anyway. But when there begins to be a certain stillness inside, when a person is no longer always on the defensive, then something begins to happen, of which the human mind may have very little awareness. It may become aware of something happening when it actually is happening, somewhere along the way. And when it wakes up to the fact that something is happening, then it tends to spoil it. It was much better when it didn't know anything. Do we have a real awareness of the fact that the creative action of the angel is present now? This is an almighty power at work. And yet, what does the human intellect know about it? Virtually nothing. It denies its presence. Do we begin to know that it is a fact, a reality? We do when we are thankful and relaxed and sufficiently still, no longer defensive. Then something begins to happen. Changes begin to be wrought by reason of this creative action, because we are not reacting to it and resisting it. Oh, but the human mind said, I don't see anything happening. Well, that's wonderful if it doesn't, because it can't interfere then. But something does happen. And lives change. All of you could testify to this fact, if you're honest. It may be true that more change could have been wrought if you hadn't thought that you knew what was going on and interfered with it by trying to conform to some concept that you had developed with respect to what should be happening. This morning, I placed emphasis upon the fact that all that happens is consequent upon angelic action. The nature of the happenings is conditioned by human reaction, yes. Human beings react to what they sense of the angelic action. They react to the reactions of others. And so it goes. But there are those who do respond, who do refrain from reaction sufficiently to begin to be moved by the angelic action. Perhaps in small ways to start with, but there is movement. The beginning of the creation of God. Now, if we see that this is the way that creation is initiated and carried forward, then we will be concerned to provide that angelic action insofar as the body of mankind is concerned. Here is the angel emerging into expression through those who respond. who are moved by the creative action of the angel. And that creative action then begins to find expression, spiritual expression, through the person concerned to whatever degree. And because that is appearing through a person, it is brought to bear in the body of mankind with respect to the consciousness of the body of mankind. If something has happened in you as an individual, it has happened from within yourself. Something may have triggered it external to you, but if anything happened insofar as you are concerned, it did so from within yourself. It did so by reason of the angelic action of the one who you really are. And that angelic action then began to emerge through you. So it started to change things in you. Here is a creative process. And it comes out into expression, what we call spiritual expression. It comes out within the body of mankind. So here is the action from within the body of mankind. The angelic action, the creative action, to change things in the body of mankind. Initially in the consciousness of that body. And we see such changes occurring. This morning we recognized, of course, some of the disintegrating aspects, but there are other changes occurring where people become aware of things of which they were not aware before. Recently I read an article that was sent to me by Bill Bayon, written by a man called Keyes, with whom, incidentally, we've made some contact, who is associated with the United Nations and interested in what he calls a planetary consciousness. Now, there are many people who are interested in this planetary consciousness. Why are they interested? Because of the creative action from within the body of mankind. These things begin to occur to people, and they tend, of course, to glom onto them and take some sort of human credit for what is happening. Well, we've got to work at this. We've got to make this be something, and we'll do it through the United Nations. Of course, that isn't the way it works. But here is an evidence of angelic action from within the body of mankind. All of you and many others have some responsibility in this matter for allowing this creative action to be brought to bear within the body of mankind. And then there will be those who have whatever measure of response who will pick it up in one way or another. They'll see something. They'll become aware of something. But as I say, usually credit is taken by human nature as though it was some human invention, when all that is being experienced is consequent upon the angelic action from within the body of mankind. So we rejoice to see such things happening. There's no need to judge, but at the same time we recognize that there needs to be a consistent release of this radiation of angelic action, for which we have a responsibility. Because the job is going to get done that way. It's not going to get done because someone has some ideas about planetary consciousness and tries to incorporate it into what's happening in the United Nations. Mind you, in the United Nations there are human beings, some of them, many of them, apparently reactionary human beings, but some of them presumably having some measure of response. We can't classify the areas in which response is to appear. It could appear even in the United Nations. It can appear anywhere, through anyone. So there's no necessity to judge, but simply to accept the responsibility of allowing the radiation of angelic action. And there will be radiation of angelic action to the extent that there is the evidence of angelic nature in a person's living. There will be that evidence of angelic nature in a person's living to the extent that there has been response in body and mind to the angelic action, springing forth from within that person. And then as it springs forth through that person by reason of his angelic behavior, it affects the consciousness of the body of mankind. Looking forth at the windows, we may observe where response appears in the world, even as we also observe where reaction appears in the world. Most of the reaction these days, of course, is reaction to reaction. You may be aware of the march of 350,000 Moroccans, which is a reaction to something. And of course, when 350,000 people start marching across the desert, there are other reactions which arise. Reactions to reactions. It is imagined, presumably, by those concerned that something is being achieved by all this. But the only thing that is really being achieved is disintegration. However, there's nothing wrong with disintegration if it makes the way for integration. So we're willing to let it happen the way it happens. But the way it happens will be very much influenced by the extent of the creative action which emerges by reason of us and others who take responsibility for it. As we are associated with this creative action, we share in a creative process which is absolute. It can't be turned aside. There is nothing that human beings and human nature can do to prevent it. They can react to it, and in their reaction ensure their own destruction. But they can't stop it. Here is the creative power of the Almighty, working in the body of mankind, in the consciousness of that body, bringing changes. Changes which intensify the destructiveness of human beings on the one hand, and bring human beings, by reason of their response, into a new state on the other. Recently I've noted that there has been some recognition on the part of those who participate in this creative process that in extending what we do extend by reason of spiritual expression, we're not trying to get anything in the sense of gathering in the sheaves, as it might have been put in days gone by. In the sense of trying to bring human beings to participate in our ministry. This is of no concern to us. Those who are to participate in a close sense will do so if the creative action is present. We don't have to make it be so. It is so. So there has been something of this recognition in a greater degree, that certainly we're not trying to convert anyone to anything or try to increase membership. Membership in what? In some organization? Our concern is not with human organizations of any kind, but with something that is absolutely universal. Those who respond awaken to what is already the fact. They find themselves as part of what was already present, but they didn't know it. And what was already present, which they did not know, is not a human organization. We have spoken of it as the body of the Son of God, in order to identify it in some way. But whenever one uses words in this fashion, it tends to engender concepts in human minds. And the human mind thinks you are saying something which you are not saying. There is something. Which for convenience sake we have referred to as the body of the Son of God. But nobody really knows, certainly not in human nature consciousness, as to what the body of the Son of God is. But there is something. And there is an awakening to the actual experience with respect to that something. And our consciousness of it is not dependent at all upon the explanations of the human mind. It is an experience. It is something that becomes known to those who awaken to it by reason of response. They awaken to it because they are awakening to the expression of the angelic action in their own experience. Something that is emerging through themselves. And that brings with it a consciousness of what we have referred to as a body. That body is ultimately mankind. And mankind isn't a human organization. Although there have been many human beings who have tried to set up human organizations in the body of mankind. The body of mankind simply reflects rightly the creative action of the archangel. That creative action has effect beyond the body of mankind. Man was not created to be self-centered, simply concerned with himself. Here is the body of the archangel, required for very specific creative action. A creative action which centers here in this apparently rather insignificant planet. There's a reason for all these things. And we begin to discover that reason as we begin to be a part of the means, the consciousness and the flesh of the body of the archangel, the means for the expression of God on earth. In our living, the creative action is released when our living is the living of the angel. The angel has no cause to be defensive. What a tremendous example there was of this by reason of the presence on earth of the one called Jesus. Sometimes he has been referred to as meek and mild. But was there not the evidence of immense strength? From the human standpoint, unbelievable strength. But that strength did not appear because he got into a battle with anyone. When all the forces of human nature were brought to bear upon him, he did not react. He remained true to his angelic nature. And there was the strength. there was the power that allowed him to carry through the experiences which came, carry through to victory. He wasn't being meek and mild in the ordinary human sense. He simply remained responsive insofar as his body and mind were concerned to his own angelic nature. He was not in the least defensive. He didn't impute power to human self-centeredness. But acknowledged the power as being almighty in God. Human beings talk about Almighty God, but they don't believe God is almighty. There has to be a little human help here and there, doesn't there? If you don't think things are going right, you've got to manipulate something, don't you? Why? Is the power of God not sufficient? The power of God is angelic action. And all things are thereby made new. We have the privilege of sharing this angelic action by reason of our behavior day by day. And our behavior will be true to the angel when we are sufficiently responsive in body and mind, so that body and mind are moved by the angel and not by reaction. And then we offer into the situation at hand what should rightly be offered, regardless of human judgment, sometimes to the contrary. Those who imagine that if Jesus, for instance, had that almighty power, that he should use it to sweep away all those who were placing upon him the results of the human nature attitude that they held. No, not at all. That wasn't what was required. Just let the creative action continue without interruption, and it'll get the job done. It did in his case. Now let it happen in the whole body of mankind. Because there are those who are faithful and true, the beginning of the creation of God in every moment. Looking around in the world of man with the human mind, who would have the gall to say that he has the answer? We thank God that there is no answer from the standpoint of human nature. But we begin to be able to say that we know the answer because we are the answer.
Wow, thank you, Martin. And you're right. None of us has the answer. Not from the standpoint of human nature, but when we're in right response with the God presence, the angel within, we can say we know the answer because we are the answer. So I just want to start back at the beginning of this talk and go over a few of the main points that Martin has brought forth about the difference between reaction and response. And I'm going to start off just by saying my sum up of the entire difference is that reaction is action stimulated by outer happenings, other people, situations, circumstances, whatever. And response is action stimulated by an inner urge. And that inner urge is what he's calling creative action. In fact, he specifically says response is not response to reaction, but response to creative action. That creative action may increasingly emerge in human experience because the human being is moving with that creative action. So what this means is the more that we respond to that inner urge coming from the angel, the wonderful one, the God self within, then that divine presence increasingly emerges inside of our human experience because we are now in a flow moving with that creative action, the inner urge, the presence of divinity within us. However, reaction is not moving with the creative urge being born from within us, from spirit, but more of moving from a space of being stimulated by the things that are happening around us. So I imagine it kind of like a boat at sea in the middle of the storm, and the waves and the winds, and a person is being knocked back and forth, and all they can do is try to react to what is acting upon them. And he says here that if one has the habit of reaction, it seems difficult not to react. But of course, one has oneself formed that habit of reaction. And that makes a lot of sense to me because reaction is a combination of two words, re and action. Re means to do again. So when we're reacting, we're not having a fresh action in that moment. We actually have some sort of habitual patterned reaction that we're pulling forth up out of our memory and out of habit. So we're acting again, and it's usually not even fully in relationship to what's happening around us. A lot of times these are just programmed habitual reactions that we developed at some earlier point in life and have simply habitualized ourselves into being that way. And I love his point there that we ourselves have formed that habit of reaction. And so if we've formed that habit, then we can, in fact, in turn, form a different habit of response, of giving our attention within ourselves for that to be the stimulus or motivation for what actions we show up with in the world. Another interesting note, because he's using the word creative action, and we're talking about having a reaction. The only difference in the letters of creative and reactive is the placement of the C. So you just move the C around and you get these two different words, creative or reactive. So perhaps one defining factor of the difference between the two is how we see our world. And so he goes on to make a point of exercising gratitude, just being thankful. That when a person is thankful, they pause in order to give thanks. And what they're pausing from is their reactions. So then they're directing their attention away from the habituated reactive by going into a space of recognizing what there is to be grateful for. And in that space of releasing the reaction, there's what he calls relaxing. Relaxing is, of course, a very important part of coming into the right frame or state of being that is able to actually connect with and hear the inner voice, the voice of spirit, the wonderful one's guidance, or the voice of the angel that's leading us on a higher path. And of course, even though all of us are reactive at different points, none of us want to admit it, that we're a reactive person. And so he says that human beings, when in their reactive state, are constantly on the defensive. And we know this for ourselves, we know this from watching others. There's this state of defensiveness that happens when we're in a space of being reactive to what's happening around us, because we're always trying to protect ourselves. We are not only subject to what happens outside of us, but at the effect of it, which means that we have to then be very careful around what situations we're in, what kind of people we're with, what type of things happen around us, because we've actually given away the cause for our action to the outside source, depending on what happens to us or outside of ourselves. That determines what type of action or reaction we produce in that situation. So we gotta let go of the defensiveness and come into a space that is relaxed and allowing, and that happens through expressing gratitude as an interrupt to the habitual reactivity. He has a beautiful line in here that really speaks to the cause and effect of our own creatorship. And what he says is, according to our reactions, so is it established onto us. Just as surely as according to our response, so is it established onto us. So depending on whether or not we are reacting to the outside world or responding to the inner stimulus, which he calls creative action, that determines what happens in our experience. So is it established onto us. Our experience, the unfolding of the events of our lives, and the things that happen in our experience are directly related to and caused by our choice to whether we're reacting to the outside world or responding to the inner creative action. Because one of these leads to an opening up of the life forces as we let spirit move through us into our expression, into our lives. And the other one actually closes down our experience of the life forces moving through us, because we are in a defensive and eventually victim state to everything that's happening around us. With that idea, he goes into a definition of response. He calls response a moving with angelic action, and defines angelic action as the creative power of God. And who doesn't want the creative power of God infused into their experience? Of course, we all do. But in order to get to that point of full response, we have to be willing to look at the ways that we're still caught inside of a reactive state, so that we can free that up and use all that energy, turning it into the direction of listening and responding to our own inner guidance, the creative action of the angel within. Of course, in order to listen to and respond to that presence within, we first have to be able to sense it. And Martin clearly says here, a person must be sufficiently quiet inside, having relinquished defensiveness adequately to sense the presence of the angel. And so if we're not still and quiet within ourselves, within our own mind, within our feeling states of emotions, and we haven't let go of our state of defensiveness and always being on the lookout for some kind of danger or something to react to, then we have the space within us that's adequate to actually reach out in mind and feeling and sense that inner presence of the angel. The problem with this is, as humans, in our conscious mind, we have a tendency to conjure up our own concepts of what this means and what it looks like. And Martin says here that we don't know what it would mean until we have the experience. And we won't have the experience if we have a preconception. We'll simply block it. He says the way is extremely easy, only the human mind makes it seem to be so terribly difficult. And we do, as humans, have a tendency to complicate things, to make things difficult, to get in our own way, so to say. And if we would just surrender into the guidance and the presence and the flow of the angel within moving through us, things could be so much easier. They're meant to be easy. But our mind comes in there and creates these ideas of what's supposed to happen, how it's supposed to happen, and we get all locked up in our mind. And before you know it, we're not in that state of quietness inside. And we've lost our connection to the experience, experiencing the presence of the angel. And I know this for myself from all kinds of different metaphysical and meditation experiences and different inner level stuff where I start going into a deep space of connection and I have an experience. And all of a sudden my mind kicks up and it starts thinking about how I'm going to explain this experience to another. And sure enough, every time, as soon as my mind starts thinking or trying to define the experience I'm having, boom, I'm out of the experience. I get kicked right out of it. And so we have to have this surrendered state where our mind is not trying to figure everything out, let alone determine what's supposed to happen, so that we can just be fully present with an experience. And that's how we are able to be in connection with the angel, so that we can let it move through us, so that we stay inside of a state of response to it. After all, the angel is present. The creative action is present, whether human beings know it or not. He uses a great example of someone who hurt themselves, and the power of the angel, of God's force of love moving through, of the creative action, naturally goes in and heals the wound. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to figure it out. We don't have to make it happen. It just naturally and easily happens when we're not in our own way. So to this point, Martin says, this is an almighty power at work. And yet, what does the human intellect know about it? Virtually nothing. It denies its presence. But when we are thankful and relaxed and sufficiently still, no longer defensive, then something begins to happen. Change begins to come forth by the reason of the creative action that is happening by the presence of the angel, realized or not, whether we're conscious of that connection and that presence or not. It's still there, it's still moving, and the result, the proof that we have, is the fact that we're alive. And so for the one who is responding to the angel that's emerging into expression through us, we are moved by the creative action of the angel. And that can only lead to more life. That creative action finds expression, and we call that spiritual expression. Martin says, if something has happened in you as an individual, it has happened from within yourself. Something may have triggered it external to you, but if anything happened insofar as you are concerned, it did so from within yourself. It did so by reason of the angelic action of the one who you really are. And that angelic action then began to emerge through you. So it started to change things in you. And he calls that a creative process. And there's this other paragraph that he spoke that I just love, and I want to read it out loud. As we are associated with this creative action, we share in a creative process which is absolute. It can't be turned aside. There's nothing that human beings in human nature can do to prevent it. They can react to it, and in their reaction, ensure their own destruction, but they can't stop it. Here is the creative power of the Almighty working in the body of mankind, in the consciousness of that body, bringing changes which intensify the destructiveness of human beings on the one hand, and bring human beings, by reason of their response, into a new state on the other hand. I love this paragraph so much, I want to share it because I think it speaks to what we are experiencing in today's world. There is an intensification that is happening in the world. And on one side, we can look and we can see the intensification of consciousness and spirituality and people awakening to their own divine nature and desiring and coming into a new way of living, interacting and relating with others that comes from a place of love and wanting to move our entire collective consciousness in that direction. And then on the other side, we can also see an intensification of destructiveness, of separation, of domination and oppression. And both of these things are intensifying at the same time. I believe there's a mass awakening that's happening. And this little difference between reactivity or being responsive to the angel or spirit within is the difference of what kind of experience we get to have in this period of intensification. The more that we react to outside forces and stimulus, the less peace that we have, the less power that we have, more stress, more anxiety, more uncertainty. But when we shift that into responding to our inner presence of divine identity, then we actually increase our peace. Things get easier. We have more power because we're empowered. We're more loving. And in turn, life takes on a whole new sense of meaning and purpose for us. That's just beautiful. That's one huge key in how we can not only free ourselves up in our own personal experience, but also add to the collective movement that's happening within human consciousness towards a mass awakening, that we all rise and wake up into the reality that we are connected, that we are not only held by spirit in a space of love, but we are spirit as a being of love. And when we relate to each other like that, our world will change. And I have a lot of respect for Martin, because Martin, obviously, he was the leader of this organization, this ministry called Emissaries of Divine Light. But he makes very specific point in this piece that our concern is not with a human organization of any kind, but something that is absolutely universal. And he says those who respond awaken to what's already the fact. They find themselves as part of what was already present. Not only spiritual connection, but an entire awakening movement. They just didn't know it. They had not known what was already present. But it's not a human organization. He says, there is something which, for convenience sake, we have referred to as the body of the Son of God. But nobody really knows, certainly not in human nature consciousness, what the body of the Son of God is. But there is something, and there is an awakening to the actual experience with respect to that something. And our consciousness of it is not dependent at all upon the explanations of the human mind. Can't rely on that. It's an experience. It is something that becomes known to those who awaken to it by the reason of response. They awaken to it because they are awakening to the expression of the angelic action in their own experience. Something that's emerging through themselves. And that brings with it a consciousness of what we have referred to as a body. So this body ultimately is mankind. It's not a human organization. It's the entire consciousness of humanity. That's the body we're a part of. That's where this awakening is occurring, even as it's occurring within our own consciousness. And in fact, that is the space that we have the opportunity to serve in. And when we are in response to the angel, to our own higher nature, and the creative urge that moves through that, which may be showing up as intuition or insight or guidance and direction from your own inner self, that is moving forward the awakening within the body of mankind. Because each one of us is a part of the whole. And so that takes us back to the beginning, which is the end of the talk, that we don't have the answer. Our human mind doesn't know. It can try to conceive, it can come up with ideas of what spiritual connection is, but then it just creates all kinds of expectations and projections about how that's supposed to look and how it's supposed to show up. And then if it doesn't match our ideas, then we have a tendency to deny it. The human mind has to let go of the idea that it thinks it knows or has the answer. And when we do that, when we fall into that space of inner quietness, surrender, and gratitude, then we get to have an actual experience. An experience of knowing that higher reality, the angel within, that divine presence. Knowing that as not only connecting to us, leading us, moving through us, but actually as the truest reality of us, the truest reality of who we are. And when we know that, because we've experienced that, then we don't need to know the answer, because we know that we are the answer. So do the work. Tune in within. Create that connection with the angel presence that lives within you, so that you can have a relationship with that dimension of self, so that you can tune in to listen, so that you can give your response, give your awareness to that in a state of expectant listening, because it is a reality. And if we respond to it, it will be there with us as us, to guide us, to lead us, and to show us the way. That's the mission. And the payoff is a new reality born of love. May that be the experience of every human listening to this, and the experience of humanity collectively as a whole. Thank you so much for listening to this recording and these shares on this topic of reaction or response. So if you have enjoyed this episode and this has landed with you, it makes sense, maybe it's stimulating some of your own wisdom and understandings, please share that in the comments. We'd love to hear what you have to say. We know what we express, and we are the ones bringing forth the new reality. So hit the like button, subscribe, enjoy our future episodes, and I leave you with this blessing. May you attune to the highest, maintain a vibration of love, and uplift your world by blessing all. Until the next time.